Welcome, everyone. We have a very special guest today. I'm already very excited, and we've already been chatting off screen for quite a while. But Jason Kingsley, the king himself, as in your last name, is here. Jason, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to talk about your book. So if you'd please just introduce yourself, and I think the whole world of YouTube knows what you do. But if you could just tell YouTube what you do, please.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I don't know how I'm going to match up to your what you how you introduced me. I apologize now in advance. My name's Jason Kingsley. I have a CBE after my name, so I actually do have. I am a commander of the British Empire, which is a bit of an anachronistic title, but it's an honor. It's like a civil honor, which is rather nice for services to the economy because amongst other things, I have a YouTube channel called Modern History TV, which is weirdly named, and there's a story behind that. It wasn't meant to be a success. It is. Now people search for Modern History TV to get medieval stuff. And it's like, oh, that's really annoying. I must do something about it. But I've got, nearly 850,000 subscribers
No, no,
now.
it's great. Just leave it alone.
So,
It's great.
so I'm just going to leave it as a funny name. Um, I live on a farm and I train war horses. I have 17 horses. Some of them are semi-retired, so they don't take too much looking after, but I have six stallions to look after myself, several mares, and they're all sorts of different types, but they're mostly trained for tournament jousting and combat. I've never fought in a real war on horseback, but I have fought in real tournaments on horseback actually trying to hit people really hard with bits of wood and bits of metal. So, as they used to do in the old days, we were not trying to kill each other, although that could have happened and we could have had accidents, but we were doing it properly. It wasn't scripted, proper combat. And amongst other things, I am a storyteller because my company, Rebellion, I'm the CEO of Rebellion. I'm the creative director as well. And I've held on to that title within the company because that's important for me because that's why I started the company is to do cool things. So we make computer games, we publish comics, we publish books, we do board games, we have a film and TV studio. We're working with various different TV and film people. We're working on Rogue Trooper with Duncan Jones.
Hmm.
And there's all sorts of stuff that's not been announced yet. And maybe I'll come back and announce it when.
Adam Fall's been announced. I saw the
Yes.
gameplay trailer today. So will you tell people about Adam Fall?
Well, we've got several games coming up, but one of them that's been announced is called Atomfall, which is partly inspired by British science fiction of the 1950s and 60s. So John Wyndham's Day of the Triffids, his whole sequence of books set in a kind of almost a cozy British apocalypse. The sort of apocalypse where you can have a cup of tea while man-eating plants are outside and about to
It wouldn't
kill
be a
you.
British apocalypse without tea.
No, no, it wouldn't. So that was so that is set uh, in a kind of timeline where we had one of the first nuclear disasters on this island, a place called Windscale. It still exists. It's now been renamed Sellafield, as governments do. They go, "Oh, we need this, but it's associated with the disaster. Let's give it a different title, and then everybody will forget that we had a really serious nuclear disaster there." So it's called Sellafield now. It's still a nuclear power station. In our world, it didn't go so well, and they basically it contaminated with this weird radiation. It contaminated a huge area of the northwest of England, in a place called back in the day was called Cumberland. And in the end, the government decided to wall it off and forget about it. And
Hmm.
you wake up in this zone and you have to work out what on earth is going on. And it's not a Mad Max type of apocalypse. There are really weird, dangerous things and creatures there, but also there's a village with a tea shop and a bakery
Of
and a
course.
vicar. There's a sort of the British overlay of apocalyptic fiction. There are giant robots in it. There are kind of dangerous creatures in the landscape, and you've got to explore and find out what's going on and when how you fit in as a player. Really proud of it because it was my original idea, like a lot of the games we do, and the team have really kind of expanded that. That'll be out next year, early
Hmm.
next year, and that's exciting. And it seems to be getting quite a lot of attention because it's a bit different. It's not just guns blazing. There are guns involved and knives and dangerous Morris dancers.
Yes, that's
Uh,
why I really love this stuff because it really does smash together British aspect, but British folklore with a bit of the Fallout-esque sort of
yes, yeah,
post-apocalyptic, but again,
that's right. So
post-apocalyptic joviality.
yeah, well, it was what would happen in a post-apocalyptic setting in England in the 1960s. What would it be like? The backstory is quite interesting. We've written some novels as well, which hopefully will be published next year as well. It's set in the same world about what this meant to an economy recovering from the Second World War, when a big swathe of England is completely cut off in a disaster. And it's not good, as you can imagine, but it's
Ugh,
survivable.
rationing again. Ugh.
Yeah. Well, rationing went on to the 60s, didn't it, or
hmm
something like that? Yeah, it was surprising. People don't realise that. Yeah, it's quite bad. Anyway, alongside all of that and all the other games we're working on, um, I've written a book. I've written a novel. It's set in I've been told it's medieval fantasy. So it is the age of chivalry, plate armor, sort of 14th, 15th century in terms of the technology. It's not identified as a land. It's just the kingdom, and there is the king. We don't even get to know the king's name. He's just the king because that's how everybody describes him. The hero of the piece is a young knight who does a service for the king and wins an award that he isn't quite expecting. It isn't quite what he thought he was going to win, and he's a bit pissed off about that. But he's told, look, come on, just go and just take it gratefully. So he travels to the borderland and to a new fief that's been more or less abandoned for 25 years, and he has to take over and he has to rebuild. And along the way, he learns about himself. He starts out fairly naive, and then he grows and realizes the world is much more complex than he ever thought.
So shall I read the summary, or would you
Yes,
like
yeah,
to?
please do. Yeah. No,
So
no,
this
you read it. I actually don't. I'd have to look it up. I haven't got it immediately to
well,
hand.
this is the you said this was the working summary, so I'll read this. If you decide you don't like it, you can change it later. So the Lord of Blackthorne summary is a young knight, his head full of his grandfather's tales of chivalry and dragon slaying, single-handedly defeats the rebel Baron Reynaud of Gorestone. The king rewards his courage with a fief of his own, but he must travel to the distant borderlands to claim it. Maybe it wasn't a gift after all? Amid the harsh and unforgiving border country, a new Lord of Blackthorne struggles to rebuild a life from ruin and forge new alliances. There are bandits in strangely threatening woods, fierce sea tribes beyond the mountains, scant hope of help from the crown and strange powers in play. As he and his people finally come to terms with the new order of things, he receives a cryptic warning. A warlord is gathering outlaws to his banner in the west. So, is this Baron, is this Baron Renaud based off of Renaud de Châtillon?
A little bit. It's really hard when
Aha.
you write. Yeah, it's really hard when you're writing fiction set in a real world-ish setting. It's not complete fantasy at all. It's got fantastic elements woven in. One of the things is that our knight comes from a social position where you don't talk about the old ways. They're kind of embarrassing. They're not true. It's just not the done thing to talk about them. And the peasants talk about goblins and bogles and Jenny Greenteeth, but that's all nonsense for the lower classes.
Of course. Yeah.
But maybe it's not.
But I think the Green Knight would take issue with you because I mean, of course that story is not necessarily for the lower classes, as most romances weren't. So
That's right. But in this world, what I've tried to do is sort of we see the world through this young knight and his painful naivety at the beginning and his sort of belief in the simplicity of chivalry and the chivalric rules, although he's aware they can be quite complicated. You
mhm.
know, can you lie to protect somebody else's honor? And where do you go? So he's not totally naive, but he's very he's very unaware of the world. And as he travels and he gets to this place and he realizes that things aren't what he thought, he has to learn and he has to still honor his beliefs and his role in the world, but he realizes that things are much more complicated. So the king says you've got to deal with the outlaws, and that to him doesn't necessarily mean he's got to go and kill them all. So there's a bit of a journey. There's a landscape which he discovers, which has got to be improved and put right. He turns up to a place with people that haven't had a lord of the manor for a long
Hmm.
time. It's miles away from anywhere, so they've not paid taxes because there's nobody to pay taxes to.
Uh-oh.
There's not much in the way of through traffic because the whole place has been run down, so nobody bothers anymore,
Hmm.
and they're just getting on with their kind of ordinary lives, sort of hoping nobody notices that they're not paying tax. And he's going, hang on, no, this whole system is designed around this working this way, and and so it's not like there are light-hearted moments because I've also tried to imagine him going there not speaking the local dialect and them not really
That's a very
understanding
important
him.
point. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Especially, I mean, even though this is a fanciful kingdom, it's very true that kings of that time did not speak the same language as the peasantry in many areas.
Hmm.
And there were so many different dialects of languages. I mean, we'll talk about
Hmm.
romances in a second, but there were so many different dialects of languages. Lombardy from Sicilian back in the day. I mean, even nowadays they're very dissimilar, but mutual intelligibility might not have been there. But
Yeah.
are there really dragons though? Because you put that into your summary, but
Well, there are definitely tales of dragons,
okay.
and his grandfather has a dragon fighting spear, which is blackened by the soot from the fire, he thinks. But his grandfather passes away when he gets uh, sent as a squire to the chap that becomes his mentor. So we see this in flashback. And so he just thinks it's his grandfather's tales of boyhood. But he's a bit suspicious because he grew up with his grandmother, who was a wise woman as well. So, and he loved her, but obviously it's all nonsense, isn't it? Well, maybe it's not.
Is
So
it?
I'll leave
Is
that
it? I
to.
don't know. His grandmother could be a village witch. Why not? Witches at the time, I mean, wise women at the time were very highly valued. This isn't, the early modern period where things were a bit more suspicious. So the why can't his grandmother be a little bit a little bit
Well,
different?
exactly, but because he comes from a less noble, he comes from a very minor noble family, probably not even noble much at all. He's sort of an outcast when he gets to this very modest real knight who teaches him all the knightly things. He can ride a horse, how to wear armor, how to fight in tournament, and how to behave nicely and in posh dinners and what to say and all that kind of stuff. So that part of his character gets sort of pushed to the background
Hmm.
because it's not polite to talk about it in modern society, the modern society that they live in. The king does keep a wise woman by his side called the crone, who nobody seems to know the name of, and she seems to be winding up the bishop a lot. And so the crone and the bishop, and our knight is told by his mentor that the king always likes to hedge his bets, which
Hmm.
is why he's not got rid of the crone. So there's all of that. So uh, I'll leave it to the reader to determine. What we're doing is quite exciting because we're doing a Kickstarter
Right.
for special editions of the book, so hardbacks and that kind of stuff. So that'll kick off. There's a page open on Kickstarter if you look for Lord Blackthorne. That's open now if you want to register interest, but then it kicks off around the 6th of November, I think, for the
Yeah, I was going to ask
for
you
the
the date
pledges.
because as I am prepared, I am set up, but I was wondering when you're actually going to launch that. So this is going to be published with Rebellion,
Yes,
even though
yes.
you're
So
doing a Kickstarter.
yes, well, I've already written it. It's written. It's been proofread. It's been professionally edited, proofread. Just slightly not funny, but it's always slightly awkward when you're the boss, but you want to get your staff to give you proper feedback on something you've done, and you tell them, "Look, I won't." I said to them, "Look, if you don't think it's any good, for goodness' sake, tell me because we won't. The company won't publish it.
Yeah.
It's got to be commercially good." And I was quite flattered when both David and Beth, who I respect immensely for their literary knowledge, both said to me, "You know what? This is quite a good book." So I was,
You know,
I was quite pleased.
it's surprisingly not bad.
Well,
But I mean,
it was
but
also
don't you write all the scripts for your videos, right? If you
yes,
write all the
yes, I do.
scripts for your
Yeah,
videos, you already
yeah.
have practice.
Well,
It won't
I
be that
improvise
bad.
that as well. I usually write notes and sort of interesting points and things like that. But yeah, so I was quite pleased then. As I say, it's all ready to go. It will be published by Rebellion, uh, probably in the new year, spring, early summertime. These things take a long time. You've got to publish it, you've got to print it, ship it out, and all that kind of stuff. So I think those versions will come out around that time. And but the Kickstarter ones should happen faster. So I'm hoping to get that, and certainly the ebook should come out really fast. I'm having a discussion with people saying, look, if they've committed to buy the hardback, they should get the ebook as
Yes,
soon as possible,
yes,
so
I
they can
agree.
read it and then get the collectible physical copy. You know, the whatever it is, cloth bound or whatever the edges.
Cloth map, Jason.
Yeah, we're going to do cloth. We're
Yes,
going to definitely do cloth. We're looking at
yes.
it at the moment. What's reasonable? We did faux leather before, and I'm thinking cloth bound. Did you know those old books that have the sort of stamp on the cloth
Of
binding?
course, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I've always loved that with the sort of gold or green or whatever it might be. So we're toying with that idea. We've just got to get the costs for it and everything. But
Great, take my money.
it'll yeah, it'll be nice. It'll be nice. Um, and it's a lot bigger. The book's 144,000 plus 144,000 words, which makes
That's
it
it? Oh.
quite a big book. I will
Yeah,
be
that's about 400 pages or so. Yeah.
yeah, about 400 pages. So it's a chunky book. Um, the trouble is when you write something, you discover characters. There's a couple of
Yes.
characters in it that I really want to do more with because they leapt off the page completely unintentionally.
Well, as you will notice, it does say book one,
Yes.
as I was going to point out later. It says book one. So, but Jason, this is your first fiction book. So, from author to author, congratulations. I'm sorry. Because now, as I tell all my writing students, if you can do anything else, do something else. If you
Mhm.
can't, congratulations, you're a writer and now you're cursed. Because as you have just said, once you start writing fiction, it's a disease. You just can't stop doing it. And especially if you're incorporating historical aspects of it, you think, okay, well, what can I do next? Or, oh, I'd really like to see this character go off and do this historical thing. What would this character do in this situation? And so once you start developing characters and they start talking to you, the voices won't go away
No,
until
they
you write
don't,
them
do they?
down. It's really awful.
It's really weird. I mean, I've written factual books and I've written children's books and things, but this is the first one where I it's bizarre to say it. I almost feel like I'm not writing. Sort of I'm always listening to what they say
Yeah, it's
and
dictation. That's what you're
copying it
doing.
down.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's so bizarre. And it's like, oh, I can't have I can't follow your tale because this book will be 1,000 pages long if I do that. And that's why I've said I'm writing more because there's so much I want to explore. And I've partly deliberately left uh, the story's a closed story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end,
Hmm.
and it's completely satisfying there. But there are parts where it's I want to know what happens there and what happens to this thing. And I've left a few pieces deliberately vague or deliberately unexplored. Because I didn't have the space to explore them, and I think it kind of got in the way of the flow of the story I wanted to tell. But yeah, there's all sorts of yeah. I don't really want to spoil it for anybody who's going to read it, but this is new to me. I don't know how much to give away and how little to give away. So
That's
I want to sort of
entirely your
leave it
choice.
cryptic.
Entirely your
Yeah, so
choice. If you want to tell us the whole story, we're going to read it anyway. It's fine.
but I want it to be there's some moments that I'm very proud of, which is probably a hideously egotistical thing to say, but I
No,
think
you
as
did
a
the work. You're allowed to be proud of it.
yeah, I think there are moments where you just go, I really like. And then there are the opposite bits where you go, this just isn't working at all. I'm useless. I'm a dreadful writer. What was I thinking?
Oh,
I'm
welcome,
going to
Jason. Oh, it's
yeah.
so heartwarming. Welcome.
And
15
you think,
years.
I can't
And
spell anymore and I don't know the words.
yep, you get to that
And
point.
it's a very bizarre experience. Most of my life has evolved, my business life has revolved around being kind of in a leadership position and sort of telling other people that I think you should do this and nudging people and going, yeah, that's great. I really like it. But can I just challenge you to think about it this way? I was talking about one of our games that's not announced yet, and I was looking at the landscape and I was going, do you know what, guys? I think this is a bit boring. And they were
Is
all
it
looking at
is
me,
it is
okay,
it a medieval game? Is it a
no, this one isn't. No, this one isn't. No. But I was going, it's good, but it's a bit bland. I want you guys to turn this up to 11 because it's just good and it's not great. And they're sort of looking at me and going, come on, you know what I mean. And they're going, yeah, we do. Yeah. It's like, come on, push it out, push the boat out. Let's go too far before we come back again. And I think leadership is a bit like that. It's about challenging people and building building on their skills to give you the best you possibly can do. And as a writer,
You're your
unfortunately,
own
you're the
worst
one.
critic
Yes,
because you're saying
yes,
that to yourself now. You're
yes,
going, yes,
exactly.
I should push this farther. And then suddenly the book is 400 pages and it's not even halfway done. And you're going, my editor is going to kill me.
I know. Well, the team when I handed it in, they went, "This is somewhat bigger than we were expecting." I
That's a very kind comment of
yeah,
going, we're going to
exactly.
cut this in two. Yes.
Yes, yeah. And then what was it? One of the production people who kind of does page counts and
Hmm.
knows how much it costs. Obviously, a bigger book costs more money to print.
Oh, yes. A hardcover
Um,
400 pager of a hardcover is going to be $60 in the shops for sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So and he suddenly realized, oh no, have I made a boo-boo here? But and you know what? I don't care because it's a story I wanted to tell.
Yes,
And
that's the
and
right
and
attitude. I don't
yeah,
care.
and I am in a totally special position in that. Guess what? I'm the boss, and
I
it's my company. It's my
I
company as
own this
well. So
company.
it's literally my money. My brother and I own the company half each. So if I overspend on something that I've done, oh well.
I would love your brother to come in and just take your book and just go, this? No, we're not doing this.
Well, we do have rules about how if he doesn't like something, we have a system which is if one person wants to do it and the other person is then we'll do it. But if one person really doesn't want to do something, we won't do it. It's a sort of it's worked quite well. We're still around. We've
So
been
is this why you have so many companies? So we have the first video game company, which
Mhm.
started with Lords of the Realm, I think, right?
Back
I
in the day. Yeah, we actually owned that. That wasn't one of ours, but we kicked off in '94,
hmm
last century. So it wasn't last century for
Lost
me, but it kind of
Century. Oh
is.
my
Yeah.
gosh. Yes, I
But
too am vintage. Thank you, Jason.
what did people say? Oh, late 20th century. It's like, oh Lord, don't start calling it
We've
that.
made it. We've made it
Yeah.
there. People look at my, at my ID card and they see that I was born in the 80s. That they look down and they go, "Ooh, no, yes, yes, I too can feel the milk souring. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Yes. Yeah,
it."
exactly. So yeah,
But that's okay. But now when you tell people that you're a knight, say yeah,
Mhm.
so they say, "Oh, like a really?" Yes, I am a vintage knight, just like
Yeah.
the rest.
Well, people have said literally, are your horses real? I mean,
What?
what do you mean by
Are they
that question?
animatronic?
Yeah, animatronic would be amazing, but no, they are real horses, flesh and blood, and they age and they poop and they wee and they do all the things the horses do, and they are magnificent. And they have good days and bad days, and I train them. I train them to do all the high school maneuvers. They can go sideways and up and
So
out.
can you tell people, maybe for people who don't know, can you tell people what a knight does and how they started?
Oh, what historically?
Yeah, you know. I know you know.
Well, absolutely. Well, knights basically that broad brushstrokes in the feudal system. You had roughly, if you discount merchants for the moment, but you had those that rule and fight.
Mhm.
You had those that pray, and then you had those that work. So you got peasants, clergy, and the aristocracy, knights, nobility, whatever you want to call them. Generally speaking, the deal was knights are the ones that are supposed to do battle to protect everybody and give their lives up to protect society. Peasants give up their lives by working really hard on the land and growing food. The clergy look after your immortal soul after you die, doing the things that you're supposed to do in the other categories. Now, obviously, that's a hideous oversimplification about it. And you did have mercantile groups and traders and all the other stuff and all the subcategories. But broadly
Mm.
speaking, knights were soldiers. They were the military wing of the medieval society. They were also the justice wing as well. They were often the magistrates as
Mm.
well, and depending on the status of the knight, they had the power of high and low justice, and that means the power to try serious crimes or sort of little crimes, like we would again in England in magistrates court. If somebody I don't know, steals apples from your tree. Back then, of course, very serious because apples food. Um, Now it's a bit more annoying. They take your fence down and they shouldn't have done. You can go to the magistrates court. Somebody might have a fine or be told, no, you've got to put the fence back, or you've got to give the apple tree the apples back, or whatever. Same thing happened in the medieval period. That one of the most fascinating areas I find for looking at ordinary people's lives are the court rolls, the court records of ordinary people's annoyances. Some
Yes.
somebody's cesspit has overflown next door, and they're really pissed off about it, and they've gone to court, and the court said, "Yeah, we'll fine your neighbour 2 shillings and make him dig out a new cesspit." Or somebody's pig has gone missing, and somebody else is supposed to have stolen it or eaten it or whatever. Things which are kind of funny, but also really serious for those people because you wouldn't go to court unless it mattered to you because it takes
Oh
time and energy.
yes.
Um,
Just losing eggs or losing a couple of chickens
yeah,
back then was very serious.
yeah, yeah. And we all know how expensive groceries are these days. The inflation rate's gone up madly. But broadly speaking, if we have an income, we can get food. But back then, there may not have been food available. It doesn't matter how much money. Well, if you're rich enough, you could probably get food. But if you were on a modest income, you probably got the food that you harvested yourself, or maybe you could go foraging a little bit.
So
That
were
counts.
were all knights rich though?
No, no, but you had to have a certain income, depending on the period we're talking about. You actually usually paid more money to be a knight, and you had to provide certain equipment yourself. So you were supposed to have a certain income. There's an area of land, which is a notional area of land called a knight's fee, which is supposed to be the area of land which could generate enough surplus to provide a single knight and the equipment. Now, that could be 350 acres, or it might be less acres in a really good location. It might be a village or two of people. And by village, I mean 30 or 40 people, families, maybe two of them. And that would generate enough in the way of surplus agricultural product or money to actually pay for a knight to go to fight. That's how I think of it. So theoretically, knights were meant to sacrifice themselves. Now, practically, they often didn't.
Yes.
There was a
Some
theory,
of them even came back to purposely write about their experiences.
yes, or scootage, or they paid money. The king went, you know what, you're a bit crap at fighting. I know you're a knight. You're a bit crap at fighting. If you pay, I don't know, £2, I'll go and hire some decent mercenaries, some Swiss mercenaries instead, a bit later, but you know what I mean. Go and hire some mercenaries in your stead. Pay me the money because that's more flexible because you're crap at fighting and you've not practiced enough. We have these
There were other
idealized,
ways that knights
yeah,
made money, especially
mhm,
when, I mean, we could talk about the laws of chivalry a bit later, but they made money by taking hostages as well, ransoming people. They made
that's
good
true.
bank.
Tournament, yeah, literally armed conflict, which you weren't supposed to kill people, though people did die quite frequently. There were organized tournaments and there were prizes, and you could, yeah, Marshal England himself, the greatest knight, was quite known for one of his techniques was to take the bridle off his opponent's horse and lead them to the end where he could then say, they've grabbed them. He had a technique, and I don't know what the technique is, but it's right. It's written about. Well, it's written about as a technique. He sort of grabbed the bridle and somehow take over the horse and then lead them back and say, "I'm having your armor, or you've got to pay sufficient funds for me to release your armor back to you and your horse." And yeah, and these were real pretend battles, if you want to put it that way around.
Hmm.
These were hardcore sporting events, I suppose. A bit more than sporting events. Imagine, the ultimate fighting, unlimited rules fighting, but with arms and armor and horses and many, many people on the battlefield. Um, yeah, and there were places that were licensed for this in England. There were sort of 5 or 6 places licensed, so you had to pay a fee to the king. Of course, it's all about getting money for the king
Hmm.
ultimately. Um, but they were licensed. You weren't supposed to do it outside those. You were supposed to try and avoid killing people because you should actually die in service of your king and country. Well, no, in terms of you should go and kill the infidel. There's quite a few notes where people go, if you die in tournament, your body can't be buried on hallowed ground,
Hmm.
which was widely ignored because
Of course.
if you yeah if your son dies in tournament and you're a local lord, you're going to make sure your son is buried properly, regardless of what the bloody bishop says, because you've got an army betting you. Oh,
Well,
you're going to pay off.
what about jousts?
Well, jousting, yeah. So the process of tournament became, as time goes on, becomes more organized, and it starts to become one-on-one combat, and it starts to become about display as well as martial skill. So the jousting, which really is just a mounted knight with a spear back in the day before there was difference between lance and spear, um, they would run at each other and practice that technique, the cavalry combat technique against other cavalry. Incredibly dangerous doing that in mid-mail. I presume they used blunted spears, I would think, unless they were doing it to really kill each other, which seems a bit unlikely most of the time. I'm sure they did it, had arguments. It then becomes a bit more about display, conspicuous consumption, and showing off your chivalric prowess and your ability, to a certain extent, your ability to withstand a strike.
Okay.
Because jousting was scored, we think, by breaking a lance on the other person. And so it would be incredibly unchivalric not to present yourself as a target to the other person. And as a jouster, I find it quite difficult not to just sit there and be hit because I'm focusing on me hitting the other person. Um, but some people do flinch. I've competed against people that just can't help but sort of try and dodge the incoming lance, which is unchivalric even today. It's really annoying when you're trying to do a display joust if the bugger twists away from you. Um, uh, but so it's a demonstration of the ability to withstand that kind of hit. Because if you've never jousted, it's really weird. It's a very weird psychological combat sport. There's not much you can do by way of defensive maneuver. You're running with a tilt rail, which is a much later invention, stop horses colliding face to face. But with the tilt rail, you're not going to collide with the other person. You're going to go past them, but a close distance. And when you hit them or they hit you, you are usually tilted back slightly.
Hmm.
But you don't know immediately sometimes whether you've hit them or they've hit you or you've both hit each other. And it's only when you sit back up again and slow down and come to the end that you look up and see the fact that your lance is shivered, that you realize you've struck. But you're not quite sure where you've struck either, because you can be right on to the targe, the small shield that
Hmm.
covers the left hand side, the heart, basically, which is a big target. Typically, the targets, the way we've done it, the targets are the head, which we usually avoid in modern jousting for the obvious danger of eye hits. So we usually avoid doing that deliberately, although it does happen. The targe, the shield, the body. So you might miss to the right and hit somebody outside the shield, or the arms. Anything below the waist is a foul hit. Hitting the saddle steel is a foul. Obviously, hitting a horse should lead to elimination.
Hmm.
Because horses should be sacrosanct when it comes to jousting today, and perhaps not so back then. But
Did they
I think
really aim for each other's horses back then? Is there
they did
record
in
of it?
war. They absolutely did in
In
war.
war,
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
yeah. There's a Pietramonte in his memoirs as a mercenary and a jouster, 15th century. Really interesting thing. He says if you're involved in a joust or a tournament, check the rules beforehand whether the horse is a target. And I'm paraphrasing now because I read it a few years ago, but he says something along the lines of, because if you kill somebody's horse and they weren't expecting it, there will be significant consequences for you after the tournament, which is intriguingly mysterious way of saying it. I don't know whether it means you'll be attacked and beaten up or killed, but
So does your Baron practice any of these things?
there's no specific jousting. Jousting's mentioned and in a retrospective, but there's no jousting as such. There are no tournaments or jousting in this book. It's more about traveling to the frontier, working out what to do, and then realizing there's an awful lot more to do than you thought.
So is
Uh,
is he part of I mean I notice on his barding he has
mm,
I don't know if this was intentional by the artist, but I noticed that he does have St. George's cross on the barding. So is he part of the order? Is there an order that he's part of, or is he part of
no,
some kind of
that's not
knights?
that's not mentioned. No, he's not a particularly he's not a well connected knight at all. Um, and it's one of the reasons he thinks why the king goes, okay, right, off you go
So
to
he
the
is he so
borders.
is he sending them to a lapsed fiefdom as a punishment then?
Well, we don't know. We don't
Uh
know. It's part of the discussion. He realizes it might not have been the gift he thought it was. And there might be reasons for that, but he's not sure. So I'll explore that in the next two books a little bit
next
more.
two
Yeah, well, I'm going to write it. I've got plans for a trilogy.
It's going to be five
Well,
books, Jason. It's going to be a trilogy of five books. I know this.
that'd be
I
rather
I
nice.
I have been there myself, and the lies we tell ourselves are very elaborate, but eventually you just surrender to it. So,
I just find it's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to the reaction of people from reading it. I've sent out early reader copies to a handful of friends who I appreciate their honest feedback, which is going to be a bit disappointing because I've already written it and it's already edited. So if they hate it, don't know what I'm going to
too
do.
bad.
I don't think they will.
I always
And you
tell
can,
people whenever I have to give my books out, for art copies or editors, I always say, I hope you like it. If not, don't tell anyone.
yeah, yeah, keep it quiet. I think people will like it. I've tried to the action. It charges along, I think, quite fast as well. So
Yeah, pacing is very important. Yes.
yeah, I want to make a commercial book that people can enjoy, but also that maybe has some layers to it as well. So it's hard to deliberately put layers in.
Yeah,
Um,
an easy read with historical value. Yes.
yes, exactly. And I've messed around with historical, not historical facts, but they reference a holy book,
Hmm.
but they don't call it the Bible. They call it the Great Book.
So in
And
my
and it,
book, they call it the good book. That's kind of funny.
yeah, yeah,
That's funny.
and because I didn't want it to necessarily be the Christian Bible. I
Hmm.
wanted it to be like the Christian Bible enough that it could be or couldn't be. And there's a couple of characters mentioned. So, for example, Christmas
Hmm.
is Crispin's tide,
Okay.
not Christmas.
Uh-huh.
And Crispinian was obviously related to Agincourt period, and
Yes.
that so it was a genuine real world medieval celebration. But I thought if I say Christmas again, it's sort of anchoring it to our world very clearly, and I want it to be slightly ambiguous as to where this is set and whether it's our world. And yeah, it's been a challenge. It's been a
Good
challenge,
old
but it,
historiographic metafiction. I mean, it could be. It could be alternate universe. It could be something like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But it
hmm,
still takes place in the, I guess, what we would call the age of chivalry.
correct. The age of chivalry, and it's in the border marches. It's in the borders were a real thing. The marcher lords paid different rates of tax because of they were expected to have more battle. They were exempt from certain obligations to fight in other wars because they needed the soldiers there. So the fact that borders did exist, particularly with Wales and Scotland, but they were a genuine thing. So that's parallel. One of the things I've tried to bring in is some of the horse control as well, because not a lot of people know how to make a horse go sideways, for example.
Hmm.
And I have our character in a certain situation where his horse, which is similar, very similar to one of my horses, when I was imagining it, who's very responsive to the leg aids. So when you control a horse, have you ridden a horse
I've
to?
done some horse riding, yes, not
Okay,
recently, but when I was younger, I did, yes.
okay. So you'll know that the way you control a horse is its whole body. So
Hmm.
your balance, where you're sitting, whether you're tipping over to one side or another, where your weight is, forward or backwards, the pressure you have on the reins. Reins should be handled like a communication device to the horse's mouth. You don't pull on them.
Right.
You kind of give a command via putting a bit more tension on them, and you can do it with both hands. You can lift your hands up or lower them or move them to the side or whatever. Ride one-handed with swords. That's something I had to learn. I My first riding was always done two-handed, and I had to learn to ride one-handed because obviously you need to
You have
control
to
a
hold.
weapon.
Hmm.
You have to hold the weapon, and how you train the horse to deal with leaning when you're using a weapon. But you also use your legs, and you can put your leg on what we call in front of the girth, on the girth, or behind the girth. So you've got three places on the side of a horse, uh, three on either side, and you combine that with your rein movements. And now I'm talking about it, it sounds incredibly complicated, but when you do it, I've been riding since I was 8 years old. So for me, I sometimes have to think, what do I do when I want a horse to spin on the spot? Okay, or because you can spin a horse on the forehand, which is its front legs, or you can spin a horse on its haunches, which are the hind legs.
Hmm.
And it's two very different places, you know. And in combat, if you spin a horse on its rear, it tends to lean back and then spin around its bum,
Hmm.
which is quite useful. If you want to spin a horse's bum, you spin on the front legs, and that can be more aggressive in a different way because the bum is a big, powerful lump of a horse, and that's going to smash a space. And there's all sorts of wonderful moves. And been trying to write these down to say, you know, he wants to move his horse sideways to allow another knight to come past him on the open side, the off side. So when you
Hmm.
get on a horse, so here's an interesting anecdote. So why do people drive on one side of the road or the other? And in England, we drive on the left-hand side of the road because, in part, because we've never changed from the way it was probably done on horseback. Because on horseback, you get on the left-hand side of the horse with the horse facing in the direction you want to go, and you want to get on from the side of the road. So you'd get on that way. You wouldn't bother turning the horse around. That's just daft. You get on and you ride in the direction you're going. So it's kind of evolved along those lines a little bit. So we have what we call the near side of a horse, which is the left side, which is the side you get on, the side you typically lead a horse from as well. Not always, but typically. And the far side, which is your right side. And if you've got a lance, for example, lance is 8 to 12 foot of
Hmm.
or oak, usually ash or sometimes poplar. But if you're fighting, it's going to be ash. It's a nice strong wood that's not too heavy. And you can hit either, you don't want to go directly over your horse's head because the horse's head gets in the way and you're going to have a collision. So you're either going to hit somebody with the lance to the right or to the left. And hitting to the left means you have a more obtuse angle to the target, which means the lance is more likely to break and shatter. Now, when you're jousting, if you want to shatter your lance, you want both ends to be fixed and you want the energy to go in to distort the lance and then shatter the wood. And then the energy is dispersed. If your lance bends and then straightens, it's going to push them that way and you that way,
Hmm.
or push up into your face. I've had lances going right up, not breaking, and going right up, catching under my chin, spinning off.
Oof.
The physics takes over, and a 12-foot piece of wood that doesn't break, that's moving at 40 miles an hour, combined speed, one going one way, one going the other, has got a lot of energy in it. So it just goes wherever it wants to, basically. But if a lance shatters, the energy goes into exploding the wood. If it doesn't shatter, then you've got problems. And personal anecdote, I was down at Pendennis Castle, which is down in Cornwall, beautiful place, but quite a long drive
Mm.
from pretty much anywhere apart from Cornwall. Um, right on the sea coast, lots of sea mist. I did a joust on the Saturday, and I did the morning joust on the Sunday, and the lances had been left out overnight.
Oh,
A sea mist came in, and everything was slightly damp, and the lances would not break. They
hmm.
just bent. We got photographs of them bending kind of hugely. We couldn't shatter any lances, and it was the most dangerous joust I've ever been in because there was no energy. The energy was going into bending and straightening, and that just straightens, and people were getting injured. Splinters were going every, no splinters, but the end of the lance was digging into people's flesh, and no, it was an absolute catastrophe just because of the sea mist that came in to dampen the wood sufficiently overnight. Tiny little detail that you wouldn't think of, but I know about. So if I was going to write a book about joust, the weather that night may have a big effect on the grand tournament afterwards.
Yeah,
You know,
we
if
don't
the if
realize this. Even something like because now here it is in Canada very unseasonably warm. It's 22 degrees outside. And
yeah,
we were supposed to have a frost advisory.
hmm,
And so frost in general, we don't think of something simple like frost, but back in those days, an early frost could come and kill whatever was left of your if you had left crops out, that was
oh
the
yeah,
end. Or it could completely damage things as
yeah,
well. I mean, even now people are finding it with brush fires and things like that. If you have too much of a dry season, you're at severe risk for fires. And that was something very important in those days. So of course, something like a sea mist or something like even just a fog rolling, keep getting into the wood of buildings and the wood of implements and things like that, it can change things considerably.
yeah.
But that's a really nice sort of it's a detail, but it's kind of like domestic archaeology because this is something that not many people write about. But if you can live that experience and write about it, that in a way has a lot, adds a lot of value to historical aspects of things, especially
I think
people
so. Yeah,
especially people who write about like the age of chivalry. I mean, obviously, I don't know what tenets your Baron keeps to because chivalry, depending on the time, the place, whether or not they're religious, changes dramatically. So what
yeah.
do you consider, especially for your Baron, what do you consider to be chivalry? And as we were just talking about, obviously, chivalry is cheval comes from the word horse.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the word knight in English comes from
Knecht.
knecht,
Yeah, exactly.
knecht,
Which is a servant. Yeah.
which is a servant or a lad. When I was talking to somebody about this, the term lad came up, which in contemporary English, you can go out drinking with the lads,
Yes,
and it means
and lads
your
don't have a
male colleague.
gender. Well,
Yeah,
or if you're in
or
Ireland,
not.
there are also women. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
everybody.
lads is anybody. Yeah.
You talk about the guys, and you talk about men and women inclusively as well. And yeah, the lads here particularly typically means male, but it's sort of drinking buddies.
Hmm.
And so the trouble with words like knicht is what did they mean by it? And it's become something else. I mean, samurai, I believe, means servant as well. So there's this concept of being a servant that goes with it. But cheval, French horse,
Yes.
um, a chivalry comes from that. And so you've got the knight and chivalry, and I think knights predate horse soldiers to a certain extent,
So
and they
if you want to
become horse
say
soldiers.
that knights are really let's say like post Frankish, post Merovingian Carolingian warriors, then yes, yeah, exactly.
Hmm. So it's really interesting. I one of my first book, my business book, I did leading the rebellion. It's just here, which is sort of a um, thank you, which was a sort of a gallop through how chivalry can map itself to business, which was a silly idea I had, and it actually became quite difficult sometimes because some of it just doesn't map at all, but some of it does. So things like honesty, how being honest. That doesn't mean, well, what does it mean? And the thing with chivalry, the rules of chivalry can be interpreted widely and or ignored. by people throughout
Oh, the
history.
knights
But
ignored them all the time. Absolutely. There
yes,
there were
yeah,
knights who wrote about how much they loved the violence and without there being any sort of religion aspect to
yeah,
it, there were
yeah.
also knights who just decided mercy was a big thing. But again,
Mhm.
if you had mercy on your opponent, which you are supposed to do, then you could ransom them for cash. And if nobody wanted to pay that ransom, well then
Yeah.
you were
Then
screwed.
the mercy no longer applies. And then
Right.
and yeah, looking after the innocent. What do you mean by innocent? And what some of the earliest rules were sorted out with the church said don't attack churches. And then yes, obviously fairly fairly obvious why they would have that rule. When you're having fights, remember church land is sacrosanct. Okay, so those are the first rules of chivalry. Or don't fight on Sundays because people are supposed to go to church and they pay the tithes on a Sunday as
But it's
well. So
okay.
you
But it's okay for knights to go out on Sunday as long as they go to mass first.
right, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So it becomes it's weird. It's almost a nebulous concept, chivalry, in a way. It's an ideal that everybody fails to meet, and nobody's quite sure what it means. And I think this is mirrored in the Arthurian, the Arthurian mythos, which is again very odd. And if you start digging into it, when does it start, and who did it in the 15th century, and Mallory, and it all gets very blurred. But the idea that you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be questing for, and that the quest is the thing, not the finding it thing, and that pretty much all of you will fail miserably to meet this ideal. And that's the point. The point is you're a feeble human being and you've got to strive to be better.
Hmm.
And it's multifaceted and really interesting as a philosophy. And really hard how it ties in courtly love and the troubadour sort of the idea of unrequited Lancelot. Okay, he did do a thing with Guinevere, but he wasn't supposed to, and he succumbed to his,
Well,
arguably
when it
fail.
comes to Chrétien de Troyes, because he invented Lancelot, really.
Hmm. Right.
And but the romances, we were going to talk about romances in a minute, but romances in general, obviously, well, romance like les romans, which is where the French aspect of the word is still maintained today, whereas a roman is just a novel or a story. And the only reason they were called romances is because they were writing in their language and not in Latin. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
But whenever they made a new character like Lancelot, then suddenly somebody else would take it up and go, "Oh, but what about his backstory?" So Lancelot had other loves. He had random children. He was also the son of fairies. So it doesn't, they made up whatever. It didn't matter, but that tradition kept on throughout. But it's the same thing when you ask, what is a medieval romance? So do you consider this story to be a medieval romance?
I think it follows in that tradition. Yes. It follows in the tradition because I try not to explain everything in detail. I want people's imagination to be triggered because I like stories that have places for me to explore in my mind. Lord of the Rings, classic book. I absolutely love it. So much is missing from that massive book that is exciting.
Is it? I don't
To,
know. The
to
Silmarillion is
well,
exists.
yeah, you get credit. You get credit for trying to read the Silmarillion. I mean, yeah. So it's so dense. I bounced off the Silmarillion so many times. Sad, but I have. Sad to admit
I
it.
won't tell anyone.
Um, yeah, thank you. It's our secret, just us and everybody else
Yes.
listening. Um, but any really good book takes you on a journey in your mind and helps you explore a new landscape. And I think the story needs to be satisfying, but also leave space for your imagination to fill in areas. And talking about the days before copyright, when fan fiction was in fact all fiction. When people that's a great character. I'll write about that character and add something else to it. And nobody cared because there wasn't canon in the same way.
Yeah.
And canon, the whole kind of rule of this is the strict story is a fairly modern invention in many ways. It's sort of I own the story. You're not allowed to do anything with it. But back then, the stories were sort of well, were they public sort of
Well, they
ownership
were
in a way?
many people, especially in courts, did read them and did recite them. They did share them, and so that therefore people would say, "Oh, but what about this character? I want to know about this character," and then they would write about that character. And
Hmm.
there was so many. They threw in so many fanciful elements. I mean, it follows along the tradition of like the lays, the Breton lays, which were very short. But then the medieval romances. There were also medieval epics like Hereward the Wake, which this kind of reminds me a little bit of that, where you read his story, the Gesta Herewardii, and you think, is this history? Is this fiction? There's a little bit of magic here, but not much. How much am I supposed to believe? And then again, and then they just built on that. So everything is just building upon this sort of lay tradition. And then, like I said, there's medieval epics, and then medieval romances. And within those romances, I mean, everybody was writing about that. France obviously had their own, and then Germany had their own. There were so many different medieval romances that they just kept building on it, and it became this whole, nobody really cared whether or not anybody, as you said, was following canon. Didn't exist then. You could make up a character and then there was nobody around to say, I don't want Lancelot to have an affair with Guinevere. Everybody went, ooh, salacious. Very good. There's even reports of people saying, oh no, like they're getting too sexy. We can't put this, we can't put the romance in there. And then you have reports from Eastern people who were reading this in Eastern Europe going, ooh, yes, more sexy, please. They had different ideas about what should be in these romances. And there was
And it,
really no wrong answer.
yeah, and it changed over time. And the literally wasn't the law of copyright. The law of copyright came in after the printing press was invented,
Mhm.
because suddenly you went from having a few thousand books being able to be made per year in England, let's say, but to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of books being able to be produced in a year. And suddenly the accessibility became huge. The price of books collapsed. Not collapsed, but made it available so that if you were of modest means, you could have a library. And by a library, I mean 4 or 5 books. Was a big library. There were people very proud of their library of 5 books, which is wonderful. I've got books I bought, not read. I'm sure other people had the same.
Oh, we all have those records of sins, my
I
son.
know it's awful. It's so
It's
sad.
so bad.
One day I must do something about it, but I probably never will.
We always
Um,
say that, and then we go, ooh, a new book.
yeah, a new shiny thing. Um, so in a way, there wasn't, as that I'm aware of, there wasn't any kind of form of protection of ideas back in the medieval period. It's something I might look into a bit, because it suddenly occurred to me, copyright's fairly modern. The idea
Yeah.
of preventing somebody else from copying your work comes from the sort of very earliest industrial side of things. I always think of the medieval period as shading out before other people. 1485, the death of Richard on the Battle of Bosworth. It's like, dude, lots of things were happening before then. You got printing press
Yeah,
coming on. You
yes,
got
exactly.
gunpowder. You've got urbanization came in the sort of 13th, well, 12th, 13th century, much more so. The
Public
whole thing.
libraries,
Yeah,
public
public
libraries,
libraries.
universities,
Yeah,
universities, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. So it's all a continuum anyway, and it's just really silly to say where medieval ends, and have arguments online. You go, why are we arguing about this? You know,
But
yeah,
the internet is made for arguing, don't you know?
well,
That's
yeah,
what
exactly.
happens. We
Yeah.
we lost the Greek forum, and so we came to the internet to
What
argue.
does somebody say? It's the biggest, because it's now the biggest village. The world is a village. All the village idiots suddenly represent a significant portion of the population, whereas before it was that one bloke that you'd all grown up with, or
Yeah,
woman.
that's Jimmy. We all
Yeah,
know
yeah.
Jimmy.
We all
Yeah.
know he's fine. He's sweet. Just
He's slightly
leave him
kicked
be.
in the head. He's fine.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
to your point about copyright, also that I mean their attitudes are very different because one, it was reading these things and writing these things was a form of entertainment that they might not have people might not have been able to have any other kind of entertainment. So we have things like plays and lays and romances that were read out to the general population. Many of them were written to be read in court or to sort of bolster, at least at the beginning, bolster a courtly experience for people either who were there or who couldn't be there. And also for people who think of the amount of people who could read and write back then. It was vastly different. You could argue that many people don't read and write nowadays. However, it was a little bit of a different aspect.
Being able to write your name or to read some things are very different from being able to read or write for pleasure.
Yes,
You
or an
know,
audience, yeah.
people can be functionally literate, but not comfortable with reading. There are plenty. I know people that just don't read because I secretly think they're not very good at it, and it's not easy to drift. I think people that are readers, I don't. I'm not even aware I'm reading. In fact, the magic of a book can be broken if I suddenly think I'm reading.
Yes.
I just sort of flow into the page,
Yes, you
and
have to hallucinate off the page. You just
yeah,
sniff the words in and the
yeah.
imagination.
Yeah, and when you're tired, you realize you've read the whole page and you can't remember a damn thing of what you've
Yes.
just read. Yeah, and you think, right now it's time to switch the lights off and go to sleep. But the back then, audiobooks were the
Yes.
way that most of the people joke about audiobooks today. So, oh, you should read. It's like, no, actually,
Audiobooks are
oh,
reading. I don't care who
yeah,
says it's audiobooks is reading. That's how it is. This is how most novels, most books, most stories were originally written to be read aloud and to be shared with people in a room. There are some people I know
yeah,
who you read something like Jane Austen, and they go, "Why is this written this way?" I thought, well, it was meant to be read. Yes, you could read it to yourself, but you were often reading to somebody else. Maybe in a family, only one person or two people were able to read. Either you had to read to somebody else or teach them to read, but it's an oration, right? You have to have that there is a performance aspect to it. So when you're reading something, you think, oh, this is a bit rubbish. The prose is terrible. Why did they write it this way? It's probably because you're supposed to be giving somebody information. It's a way of communication.
yeah. You've got to read your book out loud. I've been challenged. Can I? It's such a long book, but
Hmm.
I've been challenged. Can you do the audiobook now? And it's like, yeah, I probably should, and I would like to, but can I do it justice? I hope so, but we'll see. Yeah, I've got to find the time to read the book out. I think it might involve
22
me.
hours for
So is it? Is that how long it takes?
for around a 400-page book is about 20 to 24 hours. Again, depending on
Awesome.
how fast you read, depending on whether or not you're going to do character voices. It's
Yeah.
a whole science, and that's why there are people who are narrators, and I am not one of those people.
I might try it, but yeah, that's probably about a week's worth of reading,
A lot,
isn't it?
it's give yourself a good 3 weeks, yeah.
3 weeks to do it, Lord. Okay.
To do retakes, audio takes
Hmm.
sometimes if the audio is not correct. You have to do remixes as well.
Hmm.
If you're gonna do voices for your characters, you have to make sure that you have to highlight everybody's place, and you have to make notes to make sure that you do all the voices correctly.
Now I'm worried. I'll probably try it and see. I like challenges, and that's the other nightly thing, isn't it? The idea of challenge,
Yes.
the idea of pushing yourself. This is what I wrote in the other book, the Leading the Rebellion. Is I think we all should set ourselves quests, just small quests. It doesn't have to be find the Holy Grail or anything, or
Well, don't worry,
the
because the Holy
sequel of
Grail's not
Atlantis.
real. No one's gonna find it.
Well, exactly. But the quest can be just to get fitter, or the quest can be to learn a new sport, or learn a new skill, or read that Silmarillion. At last.
You don't have to
Um,
understand it, just get to the end.
and so I think there's elements of chivalry can reflect on all of us in our modern society. And somebody said to me they read the book and then they decided to try and shape their week with a series of micro quests. So basically, their commute was right. My first quest, I have to get ready for combat. So they get the clothes on and go out the door, catch the bus, and then they must find an elixir of an awake elixir. So they,
The
they they go and
great
get a
bean
coffee.
juice.
Yeah, exactly. They go and get themselves a coffee to wake up, and they said it was really fun for a week. They were doing these sort of ridiculous quests, and it added a pageantry to their day. I don't think they kept it going because I think it was quite exhausting. But
I think that's a very
um,
healthy way of looking at things, especially,
mm,
during COVID when we were all stuck inside for much of the day.
mm,
Then going out and doing something felt
yeah.
like a quest because you were really going on a journey. You know,
Well, I
while
yeah.
walking, 2 hours to a far grocery store just so you
Well,
could get some air.
well, I
Absolutely.
don't know what the rules were and where you were, but here you weren't
It's
really
quite
supposed to
strict
leave.
here.
Yeah, they were quite strict here as well. You weren't supposed to leave the house apart from one exercise session a day or something like that.
But
But
how
of course,
long that exercise session could be, nobody knows.
they're all a bit vague, weren't they? Um, I think the general principle is try and stay away from people as much as possible. Um, but I had the horses to exercise and I had the farm to run as well. So I remember the first time the lockdown happened, it was all a bit, oh, this is a bit weird, like out of fiction. This is just so strange as happening. I think we got used to it quite quickly, but it was very odd.
Hmm.
And everybody had to move over to doing video conferences for work and all that kind of stuff. But I still had to exercise the horses. I still had to muck them out because they need it. And I wasn't sure what the guidance was for that. I mean, I need to exercise them. I need to ride around my farm. That was just how I exercise them. Am I allowed to do that? Because it seems a bit sort of great. I can just go out and
Well,
ride all my horses. So
think of, I mean, technically, you were the king of your own fiefdom at that
yeah,
point.
I was on my own land anyway. But I looked it up. I took some advice and I thought I better just be careful. I'm a bit of a public figure, so I don't want to be seen to do the wrong thing. I need you to check. And the National Farmers Union very clear. They said, no, you've got to maintain horses. You've got to do all the things you would normally do. So if you normally exercise them, you obviously can't go to events because there won't be any events. But you must do the same thing. So just keep going. So it's like I had the absolute majesty of being able to go out as often as I wanted because I've got many horses to ride through my landscape and feel quite guilty that other people were stuck indoors. But then on the other hand, I can get snowed in and there's mud now starting and the winter's, kicking off and I'm miles away from the nearest whatever it might be that I need if I need help. So there's swings and roundabouts. But
So
but I remember that was
did you start this book during COVID?
no, I didn't. I started the thinking about it. I thought I really want to get round to writing a book. I started to sketch broad brushstroke ideas. So no, I wouldn't say I started it. I had many false starts. And it probably took me a couple of years to write the first one. So, and usually because I got quite a busy day job, I normally write between 6 and 8 in the morning. So I get
Oh
up and
my
make,
goodness. Oh my
yeah,
good. I'm the opposite. My God.
I,
Oh God. Yeah, my magic time is from afternoon onward. But
mm,
oh, I can't possibly think of being
so
clear-headed at 6 in the morning.
I get up, make a cup of tea, and then sit down with my laptop and start exploring landscape. And
Do you get up that early? Do you get up even earlier in order to do things about the farm then?
no, I get up at 6, have a cup of tea, and then I do the farm things from sort of 8. Bare minimum with the horses is an hour in the morning, an hour in the evening.
Hmm.
So before I jumped on this, I'd normally do the horses about 8 in the evening, for about an hour. Means cleaning them out, feeding them, checking water, checking the horses in the fields are okay. They need to be checked twice a day. And this is a routine, farm routine that animals need. They like certain things, but I did it earlier today to come on this. And yeah, it's just got to be done. And it's the weird thing is it's almost so automatic for me now that I will come in and take my Wellington boots off and go, I actually done it because I'm thinking of other things. Have I gone outside and done the horses?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah.
Well, will they start to complain? Well, if you
Oh
haven't
yeah,
been out there, oh yeah. So then you'll
they're
know.
very vocal. Several of them can hear the door open. Actually, I think they can sometimes hear me in the kitchen when I make a cup of tea. That
Hmm.
alerts them. Got big ears, and I've
Do
got a
they start
mule.
pawing at the ground? Do they
Yeah, they
start put,
do.
yeah.
They start kicking the door. Yeah, there's 3 of them that make the kick. One that bites his door, makes a noise, tries to lift the door off its hinges. Several that just make winning, wickering sounds and that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
And horses have a language. I know what they're saying more or less.
So
I'm hungry.
what is the Baron's horse's name then?
He's called Phantom. He's
Hmm.
called Phantom, and he's a Cremello. He's a Cremello stallion that's gifted to our protagonist by his mentor right at the very beginning. And he's fairly new as well. He's been in tournaments and stuff, but he's fairly new to this. And there's also a mule that comes along for the ride as well. And I have a mule, and I wanted to challenge myself with a creature that was different to horses. I had horses in my life since I was 8, and they're incredibly familiar. They're always individuals and everything. And unusually, I handle stallions. Most people don't handle stallions, but I've got several of them, and some are homebred. And I train and break horses in myself, or gentle them. I prefer the term gentling them, to get them used to saddles and train them in all the maneuvers they do. The mule, who still doesn't have a name, he's called on my YouTube channel the Mule with No Name, because when I first did a video with him, he didn't have a name. And he still hasn't told me his name. Some creatures tell you their name straight away,
Yes.
and he has not. But he's become a friend. I ride him a lot. He has enormous ears, and he can hear so well. And he is a right character. He's brilliant. He's proper character. Um, and in this, I've channeled the Mule with No Name into the story as well. And
Does the Baron have to break in Phantom, or he's just gifted him and that's it?
our main character, the Baron, is the baddie,
Oh, the Baron's
and
Betty.
our
Okay.
at the beginning, and our main character has Phantom gifted to him, along with he takes his armor, and he takes the mule with him as his baggage, and then he rides to his destiny. And I'm obviously channeling horses I know and sort of describing them. Um, in the subsequent books, I'm going to involve some of my other horses uh, in it as well. So
Well, Phantom is obviously Ghost.
yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah, Phantom
So,
is Ghost. The mule is the mule. And all the various are the characters. Now, somebody said, "Oh, is the young knight you?" I went, "Not really, but parts, I suppose. You could argue." And it's not a self-insert, because people talk about
what
that, and it's like,
aspects did you put in? What aspects of yourself?
well, I guess the certain willful naivety, belief that the world is a better place than it probably deserves to be thought of, and a kind of a personal drive to do better for himself and others around, a slight over trust in people to do the right thing. I think that's bitten me a few times in my life, where I've hoped somebody is more decent than they turn out to be. Not very often, but
I
sometimes.
don't think those are negative characteristics. I think,
No.
especially if you keep doing that, I think that's actually to your credit, because oftentimes people just get jaded and they don't if they lose trust in someone, they start losing trust in everything. So I think your
Well,
hope for good is a virtue.
yeah, and I think that's a chivalric virtue as well. Hope in the future. Hope is a thing. I suppose hope is a gift we give ourselves. We honor us as well, but if you just spend your life assuming it's going to be terrible, and thinking I've just got to, grind my way through to the end, and that strikes me as quite pessimistic. And I believe in optimism. I think you should strive and try. You will probably fail quite a bit, but failure teaches us things that are different than success as well. Success can be very difficult too sometimes, but failure teaches you things as well. Partly it teaches you to get back up again. And there's that expression, you get back on the horse if you fall off it. And that's literally true, because otherwise you get scared. I've fallen off horses many times when I was younger in particular. But recently, I've fallen off horses when training them. When you're first backing a horse, when you're first getting on it, understandably, the horse sometimes doesn't
Hmm.
agree with the principle of you being on its back. Sometimes it's fine. So Talos, for example, one of my half Shire stallions, huge horse, absolutely enormous. But I backed him myself. And I thought, you're never sure with stallions whether they're going to take to it. But he's such a lovely character. He was fine. He just went, yeah, sure. Okay. And I was thinking, oh, that's very unspectacular. But I'm quite glad it's not spectacular, because he's about 900 kilos of stallion. He's huge.
How many hands?
He's 18.3. So
Yep.
he's big. He's for those that don't know, horses typically measured about on the withers, which is just above their front legs. So not the height of their head, but the height of the sort of fixed point just in front
Here.
of the saddle.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so 18.3 makes him just under 6 foot, I think, there. So when I stand next to him on flat ground, I can't see over him.
That's
So
yeah.
that's big. And then you sit on that and you realize that your head is probably 6, 7, 8, 9, 8.5 feet
Eight and a half
off the
feet. Yeah.
ground. Yeah, something like that. And you suddenly realize that's the view of a mounted knight, mounted warrior, you see above the heads of everybody else, and everybody has to look up at you as well.
But you
So
have to
when we do,
stab downward.
you have to stab downwards or get out of the way, let the archers shoot them. To make them stand still and then get the archers to shoot them. But it's one of the things that I wonder whether that whole social hierarchy came from the physical structure of looking up and looking down at people. If you're on a
Probably.
horse, you look down on people and they look up at you, and
And
therefore you're
castles,
superior
or
to them.
any kind
Yeah.
of, I mean, even Mont and Bailey, any kind of fortress is
Mm.
always higher, right? To give yourself that
Yeah.
vantage point. So
Yeah.
yes, you are looking down on people
Yeah.
always.
Yeah.
You kind of have no, we don't think of it now. Well, I mean, yes, we have the concept of penthouses, right? So people who live in the penthouse might be a bit swanky, and
Yeah.
everybody else is just sort of pleb, like.
Yeah, and thrones tend to be above, and the courts have steps, and a judge will sit physically higher than
Yeah.
everybody else in the room. So you start to look at it and you go, actually, we do, we genuinely do have people higher up. Stages, even stages are higher up. I mean, physically, so that you can see. But
And they're often tilted
um,
as well. So if you've ever stood on a production stage, sometimes they'll be tilted this way. So this way you can always,
mm,
it's usually about a 0.5-degree tilt. So you can always see the character's feet. So you're never, so if you're sitting in the back, so t stages are tilted this way, audiences are tilted this way. So this
right,
way, everybody, I mean, unless you're very small like me, everybody can always see at least from the ankles up. And so this way, when the audience is tilted that way and the stage is tilted this way, no matter where the actors are, you can always see most of their body.
that's wonderful, wonderful. I'm getting hoarse in the throat
Yes.
from chatting. Was there any last sort of bits and bobs we should talk about?
We
That's
had one fan question somebody wanted to ask you. So Mark from Archaeosoup asks, what do you wish people knew more about the Middle Ages?
that people were just people. They're the same as us. They had the same hopes and dreams. They wanted to be safe and peaceful, be with people they cared about, and have enough food. And they weren't different. They just had different technology. And I try to bring that through all the time. Yeah, we see them in a different light because forms of entertainment sort of stylize it, and everything's muddy, and Vikings wear eyeliner and have undercuts and are dressed like bikers. No, they
Oh,
don't. No, they
no, they
definitely
didn't.
weren't. That's not how they were at all. But it's still fun. It's fantasy. It's fun. But I wish there was something a bit more historical about Vikings in particular, because the colors, the style of clothing was more impressive than that, quite frankly. But the budgetary constraints and also what people expect. I mean, we could talk about that a little bit, but what often happens is productions get greenlit very late on. There's no time to do any historical research, and they just got all the people have worked on this Viking thing, worked
Hmm.
on that Game of Thrones thing, worked on that Lord of the Rings thing, and so stuff gets moved from one show to the other, and everybody
Everything
goes
ends
that
up
way.
looking brown and the
Yeah,
same.
exactly. Brown. And one of the things we do know, I mean, if you look at ancient Rome, it was almost certainly brightly and garishly painted. It wasn't classical marble.
Oh yeah,
The
people
marble
forget
wasn't,
that the many of the statues they were painted.
yeah, they were
Yeah.
painted in naturalistic colors, or arguably quite garish colors. And some of the ones that were naked would have had pubic hair painted on them, and eyeballs. And they were the marble was an underpinning that was then painted. And I think we'd expect it would be very different. We'd go back to ancient Rome and go, oh Lord, this is really quite garish. And we go back to medieval. Maybe there's a
And
brilliant place in
the
York.
inside of medieval churches were painted as well.
Yeah, all beautifully painted, and even things like merchants' halls. There's one in York. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called the Merchant Hall in York, and it's been restored. And it's the wallpaper. The wallpaper is foot vertical stripes of red and green. They're a foot thick, and all the walls are red and green stripes. And you just look at it and you go, wow, that's just bizarre. But color was status to a certain extent. If you
Yeah,
could
absolutely.
afford color, you would show it off. I think Dover Castle, I've been jousting at Dover Castle before, and did a few events there, and it's a wonderful place. Weirdly, I rarely get to look around these places because I'm doing an event. But Dover Castle's got a reimagining, an accurate sort of painted king's chamber. And one of the chairs there looks like a chair from a kindergarten because it's red and yellow and blue and green and patches of it. And it's like, is this what the factual history tells us? Yes, it is. And what do you think? I said, wow, not what you expect, is it? But
Mm,
it's brightly coloured.
yes.
And that was the importance. There wasn't the choice of color. You paint my throne bright colors. Okay, what have we got? Red, yellow, green, and blue. Let's do
Great.
that then. Yeah.
Sign it up. So, but well, one question that I had, which is
Mhm.
before we go, so you're now a CBE. You were OBE, now you're CBE. So when are you going to be a sir?
That is up to others. That would be delightful. It is a life ambition, if you like, to get that because
To
then I
get to
could say
be
I'm a
Sir
real
Jason
knight.
at last?
Exactly. That might happen. Who knows? I mean, I guess as if I keep going in the trajectory and keep doing kind of good things, TM, whatever that means, it's not impossible that that would happen, but that's very much up to other people, and I'm not quite sure how the whole system works. I think what happens is people need to apply for you and then you need to get letters of recommendation from other people and that kind of stuff and then they
Letter
check.
campaign. Let's do it for you, Jason.
That'd
Absolutely.
be
I will
lovely.
do. Yes,
Thank you.
because in Canada it's the same thing. If you want the Order of Canada, people have to nominate you,
Right.
and so of course I'll never get nominated. But, but I'm sure if we by the power of YouTube, I'm sure we could get a letter campaign going for you. Absolutely.
Well,
So,
it will be wonderful, and I think actually getting these, it's a bit like winning certificates at school. Whilst
yes,
it's sort of pointless, it's not pointless. It means
it
everything.
means something
There's
to you.
Yes, it's a personal achievement. Same as learning to ride or, learning to read or all these things, these little achievements that make us who we are. They're hugely meaningful. I remember my first swimming certificate. You swim the width of the swimming pool. And you
Good
think now,
job.
God, yeah, well done. But at the time, I was so excited. It's brilliant. You get a certificate, and the certificate is literally a piece of cardboard with some printing on
With a dolphin on it.
it. Yeah, but it's what it means. It represents something. It's like a public acknowledgement that you've achieved something good,
Hmm.
and it doesn't matter, but it does matter in some ways. So yeah, I'd also love to be. Uh, as far as I know it, there's nobody with a knighthood, a modern knighthood, that actually jousts, and I think that would be really cool.
That would be
To-
fantastic. Absolutely. I mean, I know it's not allowed. I would love for you to, in the style of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, take the horse through the hall and
yes,
and be knighted that way. That would be absolutely fantastic.
yeah, they're probably. I don't know whether they allow that. I mean, we've got a, the royal family is kind
Can
of
we,
younger now.
but can we get a joint knighthood for you and Ghost? Is that would be, I think that would be amazing
I
to
certainly think the horses deserve it. I mean, the what horses did throughout history are just absolutely awful and fascinating in
for
equal
all
measure.
horses, for all.
Exactly. It would literally be for all horses. And you'll probably note in my videos, if it features a horse, I always give the horse credit first. And people have said to me, that's a bit weird. And other people have gone, that's so
Oh,
lovely. And it's like,
yeah.
no, they deserve it.
He's an actor in the video. You need
Yeah,
to give him credit. Well,
yeah, yeah.
we'd better end before because I feel bad we kept you so long. But I'm thrilled for this book, and I'm so excessively delighted that you decided to come on Legends and Lectures because I don't think I ever would have thought you would be here. As
Well,
somebody
is it,
who's been watching your channel for years, I just think this is the coolest thing. This is so
well,
amazing.
it's really kind. Well, it's kind of you to invite me on. I think going back to the rules of chivalry, I think one of the things that's important we all do, no matter what the level of success we have, is to maintain a level of humility. I'm delighted to be on the this podcast with you, and it's been fun. And after all, that's what we're all here for, isn't it? Trying to do interesting things, and maybe a little bit of wisdom will rub off on, if there was any wisdom in what we said,
I'm
Maybe a little bit
rubbing
of
it on my
wisdom will rub
desk.
off of other people, you know.
I have no wisdom to share with you except that congratulations. I'm sorry that you're now a fiction author. Welcome to the club. I mean, to be fair, everybody will go. I will put the information for your Kickstarter because you said it's starting first week of November. So I'll
Yeah.
put the information for the Kickstarter in the show notes so people can go and click on that. I'm already clicked. You click.
Well,
Go and
thank
click.
you.
And if you haven't read Leading the Rebellion, I do have the digital copy because it's unfortunately very difficult to get in Canada. But Leading the Rebellion is very, very lovely. Oh, by the way, so Jason Kingsley, tech CEO, you'll have to
Yeah.
put your OBE there. But pop culture entrepreneur, no Oxford comma. Very interesting choice, sir.
Yeah, I know. We could do a whole other podcast on the Oxford comma. I'm a huge. I missed that, so we can do. We'll do a thing on the Oxford comma next time.
You're anytime you want to talk about language, I'm always here for you.